Hi! The purpose of this presentation is to examine the 20th and 21st century literary and film representations of historic women in Mexico City and the physical places they have been forced to inhabit. It explores their contributions to the Mexican nation and their struggle to establish socio-political and cultural agency. I examined the existing cultural production and academic criticism regarding the history of these women and present them today in a chronological manner. First, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is portrayed in Maria Luisa Bemberg's 1995 film Yo la peor de todas, or I the worst of all, then Las Soldaderas, the female soldiers, as explored in a text by Elena Poniatowska, and lastly the revelation of both wealthy and poor Mexican women in Mexico City in a chronicle by Salvador Novo. All reveal how the historic women portrayed defied patriarchal societal norms that limited them to three social geographies: the convent, the home, and the brothel. Bemberg is an Argentine film director who depicts the life of the famous 17th century writer and nun Sor Juana. Sor Juana was born in 1648 and died in 1695 in a convent in Mexico City. She lived in Mexico City during the colonial period when Mexico was known as New Spain, and most of the film takes place within the confines of the convent wall. In Bemberg's film, there are two dominating patriarchal presences over Sor Juana's life who try to shape her identity. At this time, Mexico is a colony of Spain, and the king has put the Catholic Church in charge of the colony. So, the first dominating presence is the Church, the second is Spain as a royal power which rules from afar. Lastly, both institutions are underscored by a mostly chauvinistic ideology which they use to oppress Sor Juana. Sor Juana built a special relationship with the Count and Countess, who appear in the beginning to meet her. She already has a reputation for her writing, and she presents them with a play. Soon the Countess and Sor Juana become very close, as the Countess asks her to write her poems and stories over time. The Count has no problem with this unconventional arrangement, and they both see themselves as protecting Sor Juana and her writing. However, the Archbishop soon discovers her writings and attempts to punish her for them. He believes they are sinful due to their romantic nature. For this reason, he writes the King of Spain to replace the Count and Countess's position in New Spain, which the king obliges. There is a scene where a group of 3 non-clergymen in the convent are talking about the Archbishop who oversees the convent. As they sit in a dimly lit room at a small table, they all agree that he has more power over the colony than the king himself. They lament the fact, but agree that there can be nothing done to stop him. Instead, one cynically says, "We can only harass him by taking retaliatory measures by means of provocation," while the other man replies, "What provocation are you talking about?" At this point, the camera switches scenes and shows Sor Juana talking to one of the men from the earlier scene, as she reads to him a text she wrote to challenge the Archbishop. Although Sor Juana is asked to write by members of the Spanish Empire, she's the only one that bears the consequences of it later. Sor Juana lives a solitary and scholarly life. However, she indulges visitors who come to hear her recite her work as they watch her standing behind iron bars like an exhibit. Omar A. Rodriguez states in his essay for the Revista Canadiense de Estudios Hispánicos journal that Sor Juana suffers multiple marginalizations, the first and the most general being a woman, the second being an intellectual and a writer. This gender oppression stems from the transatlantic machinations that are controlling Sor Juana's life. The Archbishop cannot control or harm any of the men in the film. They are men under the king's protection, so instead he tries to break Sor Juana's spirit and force her to denounce her scholarly life, the only joy she has. By force, Sor Juana gives up her writing and any form of prose and dies shortly thereafter. Next is Poniatowska's Las Soldaderas, written in 1999, in which she shares an account of women who took part in the Mexican Revolution of 1910. The role of the soldadera has been written about before. However, Poniatowska's accounts are more sympathetic. Poniatowska explains the national diminishment of these soldaderas who play a crucial role in the war by revealing part of the nation's historical role. The status of women warriors is reduced to the level of common maids for soldiers. Tosi, the oldest Earth Mother of the Valley of Mexico, appears in the Codex manuscript with a shield in one hand and a broom in the other. Domestic labor complemented military labor. This revealing of a deep-seated dichotomy shows how the national sentiment considers it necessary not only to distinguish both roles, but that also both roles are necessary to survive. One of the roles of the soldadera during the war was to follow alongside the soldiers in the armies and provide them domestic labor. The men were dependent upon the soldaderas for survival and mobility. Poniatowska shares accounts explaining how soldaderas would forage for food in the heat, ride on top of trains to accompany armies, or use their own clothes as bandages for wounded men. Other soldaderas were women who dressed as men and joined army groups pretending to be men for as long as they could. One of these instances is Petra Ruiz, who disguised as a man joined the Carrancistas using the name Pedro. Her story is very similar to many repeated in Las Soldaderas, where women joined the ranks of different military groups successfully. They often received nicknames based on their skills and were respected and followed by men, sometimes with the knowledge that they were a woman, but mostly without this knowledge until the end. Their objectives were to take control of their own fate, take part in the shaping of their country, as well as to protect other women during the war. It was common knowledge that many of the Revolutionary Army factions would ransack town for women, rape them, pillage the town for materials, and steal the soldaderas as a source of food and sexual comfort. Therefore, many of the soldaderas would make sure that the women were not harmed. Petra herself once took a woman from a village under the pretenses that she was a man going to take advantage of her. However, she set the woman free after revealing her identity to her. The Mexican Revolution ended between the years of 1917 and 1920. And despite their hardships and contributions, one of the many problems that women faced after the war was unfair treatment again. The outcome for many of the soldaderas was bleak and tragic. As Andrés Reséndez Fuentes reveals in his journal for the Americas, there were three main options for the soldaderas after the war. They either died in poverty, moved to urban areas like Mexico City, or the third path taken by soldaderas was immigration to the United States. With their reputation tarnished, their families missing, and few jobs available in Mexico, some worked as housemaids and others as laundresses. With the great push to rebuild after the revolution, many soldaderas were forgotten and had to live without ever being recognized again for their strength as the patriarchy reasserted itself once more. Yet, with the onset of the 1920s, Mexican society was affected by the influx of capitalism from the United States, which represents the center of Salvador Nova's contribution to this presentation. The 1920s, while the United States rejected traditional literary and art movements during the modernist movement, Mexico returned to the Baroque style of the 17th century. In an essay for the Palgrave Encyclopedia for Urban Literary Studies, Daniel Holcomb writes that Mexico sees a reemergence of Baroque language in reaction to modernism to write for a newly formed bourgeois readership in Mexico City. Therefore, the reader sees the use of high register language that is a result of the neo-Baroque literary movement of Novo's time. The Mexican Revolution of 1910 has just come to an end, and the presence of the U.S. is strongly felt. The reemergence of ornate and elaborate writing is directly correlated to the economic prosperity and luxury being expressed. The invention of the classic Ford model car in the U.S. is also introduced into Mexico City during the time. Novo deploys the diminutive Fordcito when referring to Ford, and says that it is just an extension of the essential and enduring Baroque style of the Mexican taste for ostentation and extroverted enjoyment of wealth that was present during the 17th century. One of the first things that is apparent of Novo's Nueva Grandeza Mexicana, New Mexican Grandeur, is that the role of woman is extremely important and of interest to him. The public space and women who navigated the space were uniquely important and special because they acted as a public act against traditional gendered spaces. As Holcomb notes in his essay for the Hispanic Journal, by constructing the public woman as otherness, the decent woman defines herself in a binary relationship that normalizes her role. Novo reveals the fear that women had of appearing in the following admission. I suspect that due to an involuntary specialization that the blue flag cards incurred, decent ladies refrain from writing in them, for fear of being confused with those in that domestic epic that assign women their place in the closure of their house. They were, pardon me, women of the street. In this explanation by Novo, he reveals the importance of women's spaces and the fear of being negatively labeled by being in the wrong designated space. He admits that during the time period, there was a strong national belief that women belonged within the space of their homes. This ties them directly to the duties of domestic labor once again, and asks them to be unseen and unheard. Therefore, the belief that the woman should be tied to roles having to do with the home space was normalized through the fear of being labeled as a woman of the street or a prostitute. Another public space that women made their own were public bars at restaurants. Novo states that upper-class and aristocratic women could drink side by side with men in public bars, and that after seeing wealthy women drinking in public, the lower class followed suit. However, the working-class Mexican woman was not allowed to drink at these public bars. Instead, the lower-class women were limited to frequenting bars attached to restaurants to express their public freedom. However, the solution brought about an unexpected result which fascinated Novo. He reveals that another notable advantage of the bars attached to the restaurants lies in the promotion of bisexual sociability that they promote by admitting in women. Therefore, his use of bisexuality here most likely means the mixing of both sexes in a public space, and this shows that it is a novelty to see women and men occupy the same space. It also draws attention to the class differences and expectations within them. foreign, cosmopolitan, and elite Mexican women within Mexico had more liberty within the public sphere than the lower-class women. Within the chronicle, in a moment of contemplation, Novo asks his friend, "Can we, however, the patriots of the city, admit without hesitation that the phenomenon of joint libations of ladies and gentlemen is one more import among all those who, in appearance, tend to denaturalize us as Mexicans while they aspire to naturalize us as cosmopolitans? I feel not." The reader gets an insight to the contradiction which Novo himself is facing. His response is only he feels that it's not. His answer is critical because he cannot say he believes, thinks, or knows for certain that this gender desegregation is not simply another foreign import or imposition. This lack of argument shows that Novo, as an elite and cosmopolitan man in Mexico City, cannot say exactly why women and men should not be able to drink in public side by side without it meaning the loss of their culture, which has traditionally prohibited women from public or public-sphered spaces. In this sense, Novo's writing is idealistic because he sympathizes and is sincerely respectful of women. However, he does not realize that he cannot understand the full significance of their experience because their identities as women who have faced historical oppression are worlds away from his. Through the accounts of these women's lives in Mexico City, it shows that there has always been a clear separation between the roles of women and men, and a belief that women belong only in the private space. Slowly, the patriarchal hegemony in place, which enforced chauvinistic beliefs of Mexico City's public spaces and gender roles, was cracked by the activism of these women. Sor Juana showed that women belonged in the intellectual sphere. The soldaderas shattered the idea of woman as weak and tied to the home, and this allowed the women of the 20s not to fear their sexual honor being destroyed by being in public alongside men. The perpetual struggle for women's rights and the assertion of the patriarchy is constantly evolving and manifesting. However, the archiving and sharing of history gives hope to women that change is possible and must always follow revolutionary acts.